It's time for the ads. The ads are showing. No one can see what is going on. Unless there's up right now, but it's not really much to see. And I don't hear anything. Anything. Let me check to see what's going on. Well, I heard it. I don't know if the stream heard it. Because I don't have control. The stream started a bit. I don't hear my music going either. Monitor output. Monitor. Oh, that was loud. Monitor output. Everything is set to monitor and output. Why am I not hearing anything? Come on, I'd at least like to be able to hear my own voice. I mean, the soothing, sultry tones of my occasional baritone would give me something. Why is that off? Man, my computer sound alerts are driving me crazy now. Why am I not hearing anything? It's a little annoying. Oh, shit, that's loud. Okay, well. Let's try something. Anything? WSG? Okay, got a Dorito. Come on. Why does everything always have to be so scuffed? It just gets frustrating after a while. Okay, now I can't hear my mic again. What the hell? Okay, now I just got severe delay. What kind of question do you have? What's my bane? Generally speaking, politics. My name? That would be Kintron. If you go by the full name, it would be Kintron Alexander Valkyrie, but I don't go by Alexander, I go by Kintron. Damn, that was loud. So, welcome into the bookstore. Grey Wolf Rare Magical Books. And normally I read fairy tales or novels. Well, tend to be short stories, since I'm reading Sherlock Holmes stuff today. I also have a tendency to write, and when I refer to Grey Wolf Rare and Magical Books, I do have a storefront. It's just a digital one that it's affiliated at bookshop.org. Hopefully you've had a good day today. To update that book cover down there. And I do have the Pokemon community game that plays on here, so there's always that too. Let's see, it's 9:11, so that's usually when I go over to the reading area. And tonight I'm actually reading from the Sign of Four, one of the, well, it is the second Sherlock Holmes novel. Before Arthur Conan Doyle got knighted. So it's kind of old. Why do I not hear the fireplace? Right. It's going. That was loud. But anyway. Oh, this book is huge this time around. But anyway, Sign of Four by Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes took the bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece, and with his hypodermic syringe from its neat morocco case. With his long, white, nervous finger, he adjusted the delicate needle and rolled back his left shirt cuff. For some little time his eyes rested thoughtfully upon the sinewy forearm and wrist, all dotted and scarred, with the innumerable puncture marks. Finally he thrust the sharp point home, driving down the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. 3 times a day for many months I had witnessed this performance, but custom had not recoiled my mind to it. On the contrary, from day to day I had become more irritable at the sight, and my conscience swelled nightly within me at the thought that I had lacked the courage to protest. Again and again I had registered a vow that I should deliver my soul upon the subject, but there was that in the cool, nonchalant air of my companion which made him the last man with whom one would care to take anything approaching to liberty. His great powers, his masterly manner, and the experience which I had had in his many extraordinary qualities all made me difficult and backward in crossing him. Yet upon that afternoon, whether it was the bon which I had taken for my lunch, or the additional exasperation produced by the extreme deliberation of his manner, I suddenly felt that I could no longer hold out. "Which is it today?" I asked. "Morphine or cocaine?" He raised his eyes languidly from the old black-letter volume which he had opened. "It is cocaine," he said. "A 7% solution. Would you care to try it?" "No, indeed," I answered brusquely. "My constitution has not got over the Afghan campaign yet, and I cannot afford to throw any extra strain upon it." He smiled in vehemence. "Perhaps you are right, Watson," he said. "I suppose that his influence is physically a bad one. I find it, however, so transcendently stimulating, and clarifying to the mind that its secondary action is a matter of small moment." "But consider," I said earnestly. "Count the cost. Your brain may, as you say, be roused and excited, but it is a pathological and morbid process which involves increasingly tissue change, and may at last leave a permanent weakness. You know, too, what a black reaction comes upon you. Surely the game is hardly worth the candle. Why should you, for mere passing pleasure, risk the loss of those great powers with which you have been endowed? Remember, I speak not only as one comrade to another, but as a medical man to whose constitution he is to some extent answerable." He did not seem offended. On the contrary, he put his fingertips together and leaned his elbows on the arms of his chair, like one who has to relish a conversation. "My mind," he said, "rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram, or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. I can dispense then with the artificial stimulants. But I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave the mental exaltation. This is why I have chosen my own particular profession, or rather created it, for I am the only one in the world." "The only unofficial detective," I said, raising my eyebrows. "The only unofficial consulting detective," he answered. "I am the last and highest court of appeal and detection. When Gregson or Lestrade or Athenla Jones are out on their depth, why, by the way, is there no more state? The matter is laid before me. I examine the data, I am an expert, and pronounce a specialist opinion. I claim no credit in such cases. My name figures in no newspaper. The work itself, for the pleasure of finding a field of my particular powers, is its highest reward. But you have yourself had some experience in my methods of work, in the Jefferson Hope case. Yes, indeed, I said cordially. I was never so struck by anything in my life. I even embodied in a small brochure with a somewhat fantastic idea of the study in scarlet. He shook his head sadly. I glanced over it, he said. Honestly, I cannot congratulate you upon it. Detection is, or ought to be, an exact science, and should be treated in the same cold and unemotional manner. You have attempted to tinge it with romanticism. Which produces much the same effect as if you worked a love story or elopement into the fifth proposition of the lucid. But the romance was there, I remonstrated. I could not tamper with the facts. Some facts should be suppressed, or at least just sense of proportion should be observed in treating them. The only point in the case which deserved mention was the curious analytical reasoning of the effects of the causes, by which I succeeded in unraveling it. I was annoyed at his criticism of the work which had been specifically designed to please him. I confess, too, that I was irritated by the egotism which seems to demand that every line of my pamphlet should be devoted to his own special doings. More than once during the years that I had lived with him in the Baker Street, I had observed a small vanity underlaying my companion's quiet and didactic manner. I made no remark, however, but just sat nursing the wounded leg. I had had a Jezebel bullet go through it some time before, and though it did not prevent me from walking, it ached wearily at every change of the weather. My practice has extended recently into the continent, said Holmes, after a while, filling his old briar-boot pipe. I was consulted last week by Francois Leviard, who, you probably know, has come rather to the front lately in the French detective service. He has all the Celtic power of quick intuition, but he is deficient in the wide range of exact knowledge which is essential to the higher development of his art. The case was concerning with a will, and possessed some features of interest. I was able to refer him to the two parallel cases, one at Riga in 1857, and the other in St. Louis in 1871, which have suggested to him the true solution. Here is the letter which I had this morning acknowledging my assistance. He tossed over as he spoke a crumpled sheet of foreign notepaper. I glanced my eyes down, catching the profusion of notes in admiration, with the story magnifique and coup de matre and tour de force, all testifying to the ardent admiration of the Frenchman. He speaks as a pupil to his master, said I. Oh, he rates my assistants too highly, Sherlock Holmes slightly. He has considerable gifts himself, but possesses two out of the three qualities necessary for the ideal detective. He has the power of observation and that of deduction. He is only wanting in knowledge, and that may come in time. He is now translating my small works into French. Your works? Oh, didn't you know? He cried, laughing. Yes, I have been guilty of several monographs. They are all upon technical subjects. Here, for example, is upon the distinction between the ashes of various tobaccos. Next, enumerate the 140 forms of cigars, cigarettes, and pipe tobacco, with colored plates illustrating the difference in the ash. It is a point which is continually turning up in the criminal trials, and which is sometimes of supreme importance as a clue. If you may say definite, for example, some murder has been done by a man who is smoking an Indian nuclear. It is obvious and narrows your field of search. To the trained eye, there is as much difference between the black ash and of the tripotphony and the white fluff of a bird's eye as there is between the cabbage and a potato. You have an extraordinary genius for minutiae, I remarked. I appreciate their importance. Here is my monograph upon the tracing of footsteps, with some remarks upon the uses of plaster of Paris as a preserver of impresses. Here, too, is a little curious work upon the influence of trade upon the form of the hand, with lithographs of the hand in slaters, tailors, sailors, cork cutters, compositors, weavers, and diamond polishers. That is a matter of great practical interest to the scientific detective, especially in cases of unclaimed bodies, or in discovering the antecedents of criminals. But I weary you with my hobby. Not at all, I answered earnestly. It is of greatest interest to me, especially since I have had the opportunity of observing your practical application of it. But you spoke just now of observation and deduction. Surely the one to some extent implies the other. Why, hardly, he answered, leaning back luxurious in his armchair, and sending up a thick black wreath from his pipe. For example, observation shows me that you have been to the Wigmore Street post office this morning, but deduction lets me know that when you were there you dispatched a telegram. Right, said I. Right on both points. But I confess that I don't see how you arrived at it. Was it a sudden impulse upon my part, and have I mentioned it to no one else? It is simplicity itself, he remarked, chuckling at my surprise. So absurdly simple that the explanation is superlative. And yet it may serve to define some limits of observation and deduction. Observation tells me that you have a little reddish mold adhering to your instep. Just opposite the Wigmore Street office, they have taken up the pavement and thrown up some earth, which lies in such a way that it is difficult to avoid treading it in its entering. The earth of a particular reddish tint, which is found, as far as I know, nowhere else in the neighborhood. So much is observation. The rest is deduction. How then did you deduce the telegram? Why, of course, I knew that you had not written a letter, since I sat opposite you all morning. I see also that your open desk there has a select sheet of stamps and this thick bundle of postcards. What could you go into the post office for than to send a wire? Eliminate all other factors, and the one which remains must be the truth. In this case, certainly it is so, I replied, after a little thought. One thing, however, is, as you say, of the simplest. Would you think me impertinent if I were to put you some theories to a more severe test? On the contrary, he answered, it would prevent me from taking a second dose of cocaine. I should be delighted to look into any problem which you might have to submit to me. I have heard you say that it is difficult for a man to have any object in daily use without leaving the impress of the individuality upon it in such a way that a trained observer might read it. Now, I have here a watch which has recently come into my possession. Would you have the kindness to let me have an opinion upon the character or habits of its late owner? I handed him over the watch with some slight feeling of amusement in my heart, for the test was, as I thought, an impossible one, and I intended it as a lesson against the somewhat dogmatic tone of his occasional amused. He balanced the watch in his hand, hard gazed at the dial, opened the back, and examined the works, first with his naked eyes, and then with his powerful convex lens. I could hardly keep from smiling at his crestfallen face when he finally snapped the case and handed it back. There's hardly any data, he replied. The watch has been recently cleaned, which robs me of the most suggestive facts. You're right, I answered. It was cleaned before being sent to me. In my heart, I accused my companion of putting forward a most lame and impotent excuse to cover his failure. What data could he expect from an uncleaned watch? Though, unsatisfactorily, my research has not been entirely barren, he observes, staring up at the ceiling with a dreamy, lackluster eyes. The subject of your correction, I should judge that the watch belonged to your elder brother, who inherited it from your father. That you no doubt gather from the HW on the back. Quite so. The W suggests your own name. The date on the watch is clearly 50 years back, and the initials are as old as the watch, so it was made for the last generation. Jewelry usually descends to the eldest son, and he is most likely to have the same name as the father. Your father was, if I recall correctly, been dead many years. It has therefore been in the hands of your eldest brother. Right so far, I said. Anything else? He was a man of untidy habits, very untidy and careless. He was left with good prospects, but he threw away his chances and lived for some time in poverty with the occasional short intervals of prosperity. And finally, taking to drink, he died. That is all I can gather. I sprang from my chair and limped impatiently about the room, with considered bitterness in my heart. This is unworthy of you, Holmes, I said. I could have not believed you would have had descended to this. You have made inquiries into the history of my unhappy brother, and you now pretend to deduce this knowledge in some fanciful way. You cannot expect me to believe that you have read all of this from a plain old watch. It is unkind, and, to speak plainly, has a touch of charlatanism to it. My dear doctor, he said kindly, pray accept my apologies. Viewing the matter as an abstract problem, I had forgotten how personal and painful a thing it might be to you. I assure you, however, that I never knew that you had a brother until you handed me that watch. Then how in the name of all that is wonderful did you get all these facts? They're absolutely correct in every particular order. Ah, that is good luck. I can only say what was the balance of probability. I did not at all expect it to be accurate. But it was not quite a mere guesswork. No, I never guess. It is a shocking habit, destructive to the logical faculty. What seems strange to you is only because you do not believe or follow my train of thought. I observe upon the small facts which large inferences may depend. For example, I began by stating that your brother was careless. When you observe the lower part of the watch case, you notice that it was not only dented in 2 places, but it was cut and marked from all over from the habit of keeping other hand objects, such as keys and coins, in the same pocket. Surely it is no great feat to assume that a man who treats a 50-guinea watch so cavalierly must be a careless man. Neither is it a far-fetched inference that the man who inherits one article of such value is pretty well provided for in other respects. I nodded to show that I followed his reasoning. It is very customary for pawnbrokers in England, when they take a watch, to scratch the number of the ticket with the pinpoint upon the inside of the case. It is more hardy, the label, and there is no risk of the number being lost and transposed. There are no less than 4 such numbers visible on the lens on the inside of the case. Inference that your brother was often in low water. Secondary inference that he had the occasional burst of prosperity, or he could not have redeemed the pledge. Finally, I ask you to look at the inner plate, which contains a keyhole. Look at the thousands of scratches around the keyhole, marks where the key had slipped. What sober man's key could have scored those grooves? But you will never see a drunkard's watch without them. He winds it at night, and he leaves these traces of his unsteady hand. Where is the mystery in all this? It is clear as daylight, I answered. I regret the injustice which I did you. I should have had more faith in your marvelous facility. May I ask whether you have any professional inquiry at foot, on present at foot? None, hence the cocaine. I cannot live without brain work. What else is there to live for? Stand at the window here. Was ever such a dreary, dismal, unprofitable world? See how the yellow fog swirls down the street and drifts across the dun-colored houses. What could be more hopelessly prosaic and material? What is the use of having powers, Doctor, when one has no field upon which to exert them? Crime is commonplace. Existence is commonplace. And no quantities save those which are commonplace have any function upon earth. I had opened my mouth to reply to his tirade when, with a crisp knock, our landlady entered, bearing a card upon a brass salver. "A young lady for you, sir," she said, addressing my companion. Miss Mary Morstan, he read. I have no recollection of this name. Ask the little lady to step up. Miss Hudson? Don't go, Doctor. I should prefer that you remain. Chapter 2. The Statement of the Case. Miss Monston entered the room with a firm step and an outward composure of manner. She was a blonde young lady, small, dainty, well-gloved, and dressed in the most perfect taste. There was, however, a plainness and simplicity about her costume which bore with it a suggestion of limited means. The dress was a sombre grayish beige, untrimmed and unbraided, and she wore a small turban of the same dull hue, relieved only by the suspicion of a white feather on her side. Her face had neither regularity of feature nor beauty of complexion, but her expression was sweet and amiable, and her large blue eyes were singularly spiritual and sympathetic. In an experience of women which extends over many nations and 3 separate continents, I have never looked upon a face which gave a clear promise of a refined and sensitive nature. I could not but observe that, as she took a seat in Sherlock Holmes's place for her, her lip trembled, her hands quivered, and she showed every sign of intense inward agitation. "I have come to you, Mr. Holmes," she said, "because you have enabled my employer, Mrs. Cecil Forrester, to unravel a little domestic complication. She was much impressed by your kindness and skill." "Mrs. Cecil Forrester," he repeated thoughtfully. "I believe that she was when I had some slight service to her. The case, however, as I remember it, was a simple one." "She did not think so, but at least you cannot say the same of mine. I can hardly imagine anything more strange, more utterly inexplicable than the situation in which I have found myself." Holmes rubbed his hands, and his eyes glistened. He leaned forward in his chair with an expression of extraordinary concentration upon his clear-cut, hawk-like features. "State your case," said he, in brisk business tones. I felt that my position was an embarrassing one. "You will, I am sure, excuse me," I said, rushing from my chair. To my surprise, the young lady held up her gloved hand to detain me. "If your friend," she said, "would be good enough to stop, he might be of inestimable service to me." I relapsed into my chair. "Briefly," she continued, "the facts are these. My father was an officer in the Indian regiment, who sent me home when I was quite a child. My mother was dead, and I had no relative in England. I was placed, however, in a comfortable boarding establishment at Edinburgh, and there I remained until I was 17 years of age. In the year 1878, my father, who was a senior captain of his regiment, obtained 12 months' leave and came home. He telegraphed me from London that he had arrived all safe and directed me to come down at once, giving him a Langham hotel for his address. His message, as I remember, was full of kindness and love. On reaching London, I drove out to Langham, and was informed that Captain Morstan was staying there, but that he had gone out for the night and had not yet returned. I waited all day without news of him. That night, on the advice of the manager of the hotel, I communicated with the police. The next morning we advertised in the papers. Our inquiries had led to no result, and from that day there is no word has ever been heard from my unfortunate father. He came home with his heart full of hope to find some peace, some comfort. Instead, she put her hand to her throat, and a choking sob cut short the sentence. "The date?" asked Holmes, opening his notebook. "He disappeared upon the 3rd of December, 1778, nearly 10 years ago." "His luggage?" "Remained at the hotel. There was nothing in it to suggest a clue. Some clothes, some books, and a considerable number of curiosities from the Andaman Islands. He had been one of the officers in charge of a convict guard there." "Had he any friends in town?" "Only one that we know of. Major Sholto, of his own regiment, the 34th Bombay Infantry. The major had retired some little time before and lived in the Upper Norwood. We communicated with him, of course, but he did not even know that his brother officer was in England." "A singular case," remarked Holmes. "I have not yet described to you the most singular part. About 6 years ago, to be exact, upon the 4th of May, 1882, an advertisement appeared in the Times asking for the address of Miss Mary Morstan, and stating that it would be to her advantage to come forward. There was no name or address appended. I had at that time just entered the family of Mrs. Cecil Forrester in the capacity of governess. By her advice, I published my address in the advertisement column. The same day there arrived through some postcard box addressed to me, which I found to contain a very large and lustrous pearl. No word of writing was enclosed. Ever since, every year upon the same date there has always appeared a similar box, containing a similar pearl, without any clue as to the sender. They must have pronounced by an expert to be a rare variety and of considerable value. You can see for yourselves that they are very handsome." She opened a flat box as she spoke, and showed me 6 of the finest pearls that I had ever seen. Your statement is most interesting, said Sherlock Holmes. Has anything else occurred to you? Yes and no later than today. That is why I came to you. This morning I received this letter, which you will perhaps read for yourself. Thank you, said Holmes. The letter too, please. Postmark London, Southwest. Date July 7th. Man's thumb mark in the corner. Possibly postman. Best quality paper. Envelopes at 6 pence a packet. Particularly man and his stationery. Now address. I'll be at the third pillar from the left outside Lyceum Theatre tonight at 7 o'clock. If you are distrustful, bring 2 friends. If you are a wronged woman, and shall have justice. Do not bring police. If you do, all will be in vain. Your unknown friend. Well, really, this is a very pretty little mystery. What do you intend to do, Miss Morson? That is exactly what I want to ask you. Then we shall certainly go, you and I. And yes, why, Dr. Watson is the very man. Your correspondent says 2 friends. He and I have worked together before. But would he come? She asked, with something appealing in her voice and expression. I should be proud and happy, I said vehemently, and if I can be of any service. You are both very kind, she answered. I have led a retired life and have no friends to whom I could appeal to. If I am here at 6, it will do, I suppose. You must be no later, said Holmes. There is one other point, however. Is this handwriting the same that is upon the pearl box addresses? I have them here, she answered, producing half a dozen pieces of paper. You are certainly the model client. You have the correct intuition. Let me see them now. He spread out the papers upon the table, and gave little darting glances from one to the other. They are disguised hands, except the letter, he said presently. There can be no question as to their authorship. See how the irrepressible Greek's E will break out, and see the twirl of the final S. They are undoubtedly by the same person. I should not like to suggest false hopes, Miss Morson, but is there any resemblance between this hand and that of your father? Nothing could be more unlike. I expected you to say that. We shall look out for you, miss, at 6. Pray allow me to keep the papers. I may look into the matter before then. It is only 3:30. Au revoir, then. Au revoir, said our visitor, with a bright, kindly glance from one to the other of us. She replaced her pearl box into her bosom and hurried away. Standing at the window, I watched her walk briskly down the street until a grey turban and white feather were but a speck in the sombre crowd. What a very attractive woman, I exclaimed, turning to my companion. He had lit his pipe again and was leaning back with drooping eyelids. Is she? He said languidly. I did not observe. You really are an automaton, a calculating machine, I cried. Is there something positively inhuman about you at all times? He smiled gently. It is of the first importance, he said, not to allow your judgment to be biased by personal qualities. A client to me is a mere unit, a factor in a problem. The emotional qualities are antagonistic to clear reasoning. I assure you that the most winning woman I ever knew was hanged for poisoning 3 little children for their insurance money. And the most repellent man of my acquaintance is a philanthropist who has spent nearly $250,000 upon the London pool. In this case, however, I make no exceptions. The exception disproves the rule. Have you ever had an occasion to study character and handwriting? What do you make of this fellow's scribble? It is legible and regular, I answered. A man of business habits and some force of character. Holmes shook his head. Look at the long letters, he said. They hardly rise above the common herd. That D might be an A, and that L might be an E. Men of character always differentiate their long letters. However, illegibility, they're right. There's vacillation in the K's and self-esteem in his capitals. I'm going out now. I have some few references to make. Let me recommend this book, one of the most remarkable ever penned. It is Winwood Reade's Martyrdom of Man. I shall be back in an hour. I sat in the window with a volume in my hand, but my thoughts were far from the daring and speculations of the writer. My mind ran upon our late visitor, her smiles, the deep, rich tones of her voice, the strange mystery which overhung her life. If she were 17 at the time of her father's disappearance, she must be 27 by now. Sweet age, when youth has not lost its self-consciousness and become a little sobered by experience. So I sat and mused, until such dangerous thoughts came to my head that I hurried away to my desk and plunged furiously into the latest treatise upon pathology. What was I, an army surgeon with a weak leg, or a weaker banking account, that I should dare to think of such things? She was a unit, a factor, nothing more. If my future were black, it would be better surely to face it like a man than to attempt to brighten it by the mere will-o'-wisps of the imagination. Okay. Let me check real quick. Okay, I've got 11 minutes pre-roll. Chapter 3. In Quest of a Solution. It was 5:30 before Holmes returned. He was bright, eager, and in excellent spirits, a mood which, in this case, alternated with fits of the blackest depression. There's no great mystery in this matter, he said, taking a cup of tea which I had poured out for him. The facts appear to admit of only one explanation. What? Have you solved it already? Well, that is too much to say. I have discovered a suggestive fact, that is all. It is, however, very suggestive. The details are still to be added. I have just found, on consulting the back files of the Times, that Major Sholto, of Upper Norwood, late of the 34th Bombay Industry, died upon the 28th of April in 1882. I may be very obtuse, Holmes, but I fail to see what that suggests. No? You surprise me. Look at it in this way. Then Captain Marston disappears. The only person in London whom he could have visited is Major Sholto. Major Sholto denies having heard that he was in London. 4 years later, Sholto dies. Within a week of his Captain Morton's death, daughter receives a valuable present, which is repeated from year to year, now accumulates in a letter which describes her as a wronged woman. What wrong can it refer to except this deprivation of her father? And why should the presents begin immediately after Sholto's death? Unless it is that Sholto's heir knows something of the mystery and desires to make compensation. Have you any alternative theory which would meet these facts? But what a strange compensation! How strangely made! Why, too, should he write a letter now rather than 6 years ago? Again, the letter speaks of giving her justice. What justice can she have now? It is too much to suppose that her father is still alive, that there is no other injustice in her case that you know of. There are difficulties. There are certainly difficulties, said Sherlock Holmes pensively, but your expedition of tonight will solve them all. Here is a four-wheeler, and Miss Morton inside. Are you all ready? Then we had better go down, for it is a little past the hour. I picked up my hat and my heaviest stick, but observed that Holmes took his revolver from his drawer and slipped it into his pocket. It was clear that he thought our night's work might be a serious one. Miss Morton was muffled in a dark cloak, and her sensitive face was composed, but pale. She must have been more than a woman if she did not feel some uneasiness in the strange enterprise upon which we were embarking. Yet her self-control was perfect, and she readily answered the few additional questions which Sherlock Holmes put to her. Major Sholto was a very particular friend of Papa's, she said. His letters were very full of allusions to the Major. He and Papa were in command of the troops of Andaman Islands, so they were thrown a great deal together. By the way, a curious paper was found in Papa's desk which no one could understand. I don't suppose that it is of the slightest importance, but I thought you might care to see it. So I brought it with me. It is here. Holmes unfolded the paper carefully and smoothed it out upon his knee. Then he very methodically examined it all over with his double lens. It is paper of native Indian manufacture, he remarked. It has some time been pinned to a board. The diagram upon it appears to be a plan of part of a larger building of numerous halls, corridors, and passages. At one point it is a small cross with red ink, and above it is 337 from left. It's faded in pencil writing. In the left-hand corner is a curious hieroglyph, like four crosses in a line, with their arms touching beside it. Beside it is written in very rough and coarse letters, the sign of the four. Jonathan Small, Mammoth Sign, Abdullah Khan, and Dost Akbar. No, I confess that I do not see how this bears upon the matter. It is evidently a document of importance. It has been kept carefully in a pocket-book, for one side is as clean as the other. It was in his pocket-book that I found it. Preserve it carefully, then, Miss Morstan, for it may prove to be of use to us. I begin to suspect that the matter may turn out to be much deeper and more subtle than I had at first supposed. I must reconsider the idea. He leaned back in the cab, and I could see by his drawn brow and vacant eye that he was thinking intently. Miss Morton and I chatted in an undertone about our present expedition and its possible outcome, but our companion maintained his impenetrable reserve until the end of our journey. It was a September evening, and not yet 7 o'clock, but the day had been a dreary one, and a dense, drizzly fog lay upon the great city. Mud-colored clouds drooped sadly over the muddy streets. Down in the strand of lights, but were simply splotches of diffused light, which threw a feeble circular glimmer upon the slimy pavement. The yellow glare from the shop windows streamed out into the steamy, vaporous air, then threw a murky, shifting radiance across the crowded thoroughfare. There was, to my mind, something eerie and ghost-like in the endless procession of faces which flitted across the narrow bars of light. Sad faces and glad, haggard and merry. Like all humankind, they flitted from the gloom into the light, and so back into the gloom once more. I am not subject to impressions, but the dull, heavy evening with the strange business upon which we were engaged combined to make me nervous and depressed. I could see from Miss Morton's manner that she was suffering from the same feelings. Holmes alone could rise superior to petty influences. He held his open notebook upon his knee, and from time to time he jotted down figures and memoranda in the light of the his pocket lantern. At the Lyceum Theatre, the crowds were already there, thick as the side entrances. In front, a continuous stream of hansoms and four-wheelers were rattling up, discharging their cargoes of shirt-fronted men and bejeweled, bediamonded women. We had hardly reached the third pillar, which was our rendezvous, before a small, dark, brisk man in the dress of a coachman accosted us. "Are you the parties who come with Miss Morstan?" he asked. "I am Miss Morstan, and these two gentlemen are my friends," she said. He bent a pair of wonderfully penetrating and questioning eyes upon us. "You'll excuse me, miss," he said, with a certain dogged manner, "but I was asked you to give me your word that neither of your companions is a police officer." "I give you my word on that," she answered. He gave a shrill whistle, on which the street Arab led across the four-wheeler and opened the door. The man who had addressed us mounted to the box, while we took our places inside. We had hardly done so before the driver whipped up his horse, and we plunged away at a furious pace through the foggy streets. The situation was a curious one. We were driving to an unknown place on an unknown errand. Yet our invitation was neither a complex host, which was an inconceivable hypothesis, or else we had a good reason to think that the important issues might hang upon our journey. Miss Morstan's demeanor was as resolute and collected as ever. I endeavored to cheer and amuse her by reminiscences of my adventures in Afghanistan, but, to tell the truth, I was myself too excited in their own situation, and so curious as to our destination that my stories were slightly involved. To this day she declares that I told her one moving anecdote as to how a musket looked into my tent at the dead of night, and how I fired a double-barreled tiger cub at it. At first I had some idea as to the direction in which we were driving, but soon, with our pace, the fog, and my own limited knowledge of London, I lost my bearings and knew nothing, save that we seemed to be going a very long way. Sherlock Holmes was never at fault, however, and he muttered the names of the cab rattled through the squares in and out of the tortuous by streets. Rochester Row, he said. Now Vincent Square. Now we are come out of the Vauxhall Bridge Road. We're making for the Surrey side, apparently. Yes, I thought so. Now we are on the bridge. You can catch a glimpses of the river. We did indeed get a fleeting view of the stretch of the Thames, with the lamp shining upon the broad, silent river. But our cab dashed on, and was soon involved in a labyrinth of streets upon the other side. Wandsworth Road, said my companion. Priory Road, Larkham Lane, Stockwell Place, Robert Street, Cold Harbour Lane. Our guest does not appear to take us very fashionable regions. We had indeed reached a questionable and forbidding neighborhood. Long lines of dull brick houses were only received by the coarse glare of the tawdry brilliance of public houses at the corners. Then came rows of two-storied villas, each with a fronting of miniature garden, and then again interminable lines of new, staring brick buildings. The monster tentacles of this giant city were throwing out to the new country. At last the cab drew up to the third house at a new terrace. None of the other houses were inhabited, and that at which we stopped was as dark as its neighbors, save for a single glimmer in the kitchen window. On our knocking, however, the door was instantly thrown open by a Hindu servant, clad in the yellow turban, white, loose-fitting clothes, and a yellow sash. There was something strangely incongruous in this oriental figure framed in the commonplace doorway of a third-rate suburban dwelling home. "The Sahab waits for you," he said. Spoken even there came a high, piping voice from the inner room. "Show them in to me, Kit Mukhtar," he cried. "Show them straight into me."
Chapter 4. The Story of the Bald-Headed Man. We followed the Indian down a sordid and common passage, ill-lit and worse furnished, until we came to a door upon the right, which he threw open. A blaze of yellow light streamed out upon us, and in the center of the glare there stood a small man with a very high head, a bristle of red hair all around the fringe of it, and a bald, shining scalp which shot out from among it like a mountain peak from fir trees. He writhed his hands together as he stood, and his features were in a perpetual jerk, now smiling, now scowling, but never an instant in repose. Nature had given him a pendulous lip, and two visible lines of yellow and irregular teeth, which he strove feebly to conceal by constantly passing his hand over the lower part of his face. In spite of his obtrusive baldness, he gave the impression of youth. In point of fact, he had just turned his 30th year. "Your servant, Miss Morstan," he kept repeating in this thin, high voice. "Your servant, gentlemen. Pray step into my little sanctum. A small place, miss, but furnished to my own liking. An oasis of art in the howling desert of the South London." We were all astonished by the appearance of the apartment into which he invited us. In that sorry house it looked out of place as a diamond in the first waters of the setting brass. The richest and glossiest of curtains and tapestries draped the walls, looped back here and there to expose some richly mounted paintings or oriental vase. The carpet was an amber and black, and so soft and so thick that a foot sank pleasantly into it, as if into a bed of moss. Two great tiger skins thrown athwart were increased by suggestions of Eastern luxury, as did a large hookah which stood upon the mat in the corner. A lamp of a fashion of silver dove hung almost invisibly golden wire in the center of the room. As it burned, it filled the air with a subtle aromatic odor. "Mr. Thaddeus Sholto," said the little man, still jerking and smiling. "That is my name. You are Miss Morstan, of course, and these gentlemen?" "This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson." "A doctor, eh?" he cried, much excited. "Have you your stethoscope? Might I ask you, would you have the kindness? I have doubts of my mitral valve. If you would be so very good, my aortic may rely upon, but I should value your opinion on the mitral." I listened to his heart as requested, but was unable to find anything amiss, save, indeed, that he was in the ecstasy of fear, for he shivered from head to foot. "It appears to be normal," I said. "You have no cause for uneasiness." "You will excuse my anxiety, Miss Morstan," he remarked airily. "I am a great sufferer, and have long had suspicions of the valve. I am delighted to hear that you are unwarranted. Had your father, Miss Morstan, refrained from throwing the strain upon his heart, he might have been alive now." I could have struck the man across the face, so hot that was this so callous, the offhand reference to a delicate as matter as Miss Morstan sat down, and her face grew white to the lips. "I knew in my heart that he was dead," she said. "I can give you every information," said he. "But what is more, I can do you justice, and I will, too, whatever Brother Bartholomew may say. I am so glad to have your friends here, not only as an escort to you, but also as witnesses as to what I am about to do and say. The three of us can now show a bold front to Brother Bartholomew. But let us have no outsiders, no police or officials. We can settle everything satisfactorily among ourselves, without any interference. Nothing would annoy Brother Bartholomew more than any publicity." He sat down upon a low settee and blinked at us inquisitively with his weak, watery blue eyes. Wow. As for my part, said Holmes, whatever you may choose will say no and go no further. I nodded to show my agreement. That is well, he said. May I offer you a glass of Chianti, Miss Morstan? Or of Tokay? I keep no other wines. Shall I open a flask? No. Well, then, I trust that you have no objection to tobacco smoke, to the balsamic odor of the Eastern tobacco. I am a little nervous, and I find my hookah to be an invaluable sedative. As he applied the taper to the great bowl, and the smoke bubbled merrily through the orris water, we sat there in the semicircle, and with our heads advanced and our chins upon our hands, while the strange, jerky little fellow in his high, shining head puffed uneasily at the center. When I first determined to make this communication to you, he said, I might have given you my address, but I feared that you might disregard my request and bring unpleasant people with you. I took the liberty, therefore, of making an appointment in such a way that my man Williams might be able to see you first. I have complete confidence in his dissertation, and he had others, if we were dissatisfied to produce no further in the matter. You'll excuse the precautions, but I am a man of somewhat retiring, and I might even say refined taste, and there is nothing more unaesthetic than of a policeman. I have a natural shrinking from all forms of rough materialism. I seldom come in contact with a rough crowd. I live, as you see, with some little atmosphere of elegance around me. I may call myself a patron of the arts. It is my weakness, the landscape of a general cut, and what the connoisseur perhaps might throw a doubt upon the Salvator Rosa, there cannot be in the least question of my bourgeoisie. I am partial to the modern French school. You will excuse me, Mr. Sholto, said Miss Morson, but I am here upon your request to learn something which you desire to tell me. It is very late, and I should desire the interview to be as short as possible. At the best, I must take some time, he answered, for we have certainly have to go to Norwood to see Brother Bartholomew. We shall go and try to get the very better of Brother Bartholomew. He is very angry with me for taking the course which has seemed right to me. I had quite high words with him last night, and you cannot imagine what a terrible fellow he is when he is angry. If we are to go to Norwood, it would perhaps be as well as we start at once, I ventured to remark. He laughed until his ears were quite red. That would hardly do, he cried. I don't know what he would say if I brought you in that sudden way. No, I must prepare you by showing you how we stand to each other. In the first place, I must tell you that there are several points in the story of which I am myself ignorant. I can only lay the facts before you as far as I know them myself. My father was, as you may have guessed, Major John Sholto, once of the Indian Army. He retired some 11 years ago and came to live in Porchenderry Lodge in Upper Norwood. He had prospered in India and brought back with him a considerable sum of money, a large collection of valuable curiosities, and a staff of native servants. With the advantages, he bought himself a house and lived in luxury. My twin brother Bartholomew and I were his only children. I very well remember the sensation which they caused with the disappearance of Captain Morstan. We had read the details in the papers, and knowing that he had been a friend of our father's, we discussed the case freely in his presence. He used to join in our speculations as to what could have happened. Never for an instant did we suspect that he had the whole hidden secret of the breast. That of the men he alone knew the fate of Martha Morstan. We did know, however, that some mystery, some positive danger overhung our father. He was very fearful of going out alone, and he always employed two prize fighters to act as porters in Portionberry Lodge. Williams drove you to tonight and was one of them. He was once lightweight champion of England. Our father would never tell us what it was he feared, but he had the most marked aversion of men with wooden legs. On one occasion, he actually fired his revolver at a wooden-legged man, who proved to be a harmless unman canvassing his orders. He had to pay a large sum of hush to keep it up. My brother and I used to think a mere whim of my father's, but events have since led us to change our opinion. Early in 1882, my father received a letter from India which was a great shock to him. He nearly fainted at the breakfast table when he opened it, and from that day he sickened to his death. What was in the letter we could never discover, but I could see that it held some sort of written in scrawling hand. He had suffered for years from an enlarged spleen, and now had become rapidly worse. And towards the end of April, we were informed that he was beyond all hope, and that he wished to make less communication to us. When he entered his room, he was propped up on his pillows and breathing heavily. We besought to lock the door and come up to either side of the bed. In grasping our hands, he made a remarkable statement to us, in a voice which was broken such as emotional by pain. I shall try to give you the word in its very own words. I have only one thing, he said, which weighs upon my mind at this supreme moment. It is my treatment of poor Morson's orphan. The cursed greed which has been my besetting sin through life has withheld her treasure, half of at least which should have been hers. And yet I have made no use of it myself, so blind and foolish a thing is avarice. The mere feeling of possession has been so dear to me that I could not bear to share it with another. See that chaplet tipped with pearls beside that quinine bottle? Even that I could not bear to part with, although I hadn't got it out of the design of sending it to her. You, my sons, will give her a fair share of the Angler treasure, but send her nothing, not even the chaplet, until I am gone. After all, men have been as bad as this have been recovered. I will tell you how Morson died, he continued. He had suffered for years from a weak heart, but he concealed it from everyone. I alone knew it. When in India, he and I had come into a remarkable chain of circumstances, came into possession of a considerable treasure. I brought it over to England, and on the night Morson's arrival he came straight to me as if to claim his share. He walked over from the station, and was admitted by my faithful old Loud Chowder, who is now dead. Morson and I had a difference of opinion as to the division of the treasure, and we came to heated words. Morson had sprung out of his chair in a paroxysm of anger, when he suddenly pressed his hand to his side. His face turned a dusky blue, and he fell downwards, cutting his head against a corner of the treasure chest. When I stooped over him, I found him dead, and to my horror. For a long time I sat half distracted, wondering what I should do. My first impulse was, of course, to call for assistance, but I could not but recognize that there was every chance that I would be accused of his murder. His death at the moment of a quarrel, and the gash of his head would be black against me. Again, an official inquiry would have made without bringing out some facts of the treasure, which I was particularly anxious to keep secret. He had told me that no soul upon earth knew where he had gone. There seemed to be no necessity why any soul should ever know. I was still pondering over the matter when, looking up, I saw that my servant, Chowder, was in the doorway. He had stolen and bolted the door behind him. Do not fear, Sahib, he said. No one need know that you have killed him. Let us hide him away, and who is wiser? I did not kill him, said I. El Chado shook his head and smiled. I heard it all, Sahib, he said. I heard you quarrel, and I heard the blow. But my lips are sealed. You are asleep in the house. Let us put him our way together. And that was enough to decide me. If my own servant did not believe my innocence, how could I hope to make it good with the other 12 foolish tradesmen in the jury box? El Chato and I disposed of the body that night, and within a few days the London papers were full of the mysterious disappearance of Captain Morstan. You will see from what I say that I can hardly be blamed on the matter. My fault lies in the fact that we concealed not only the body, but also the treasure, and that I have clung to Morstan's share as well as my own. I wish you, therefore, to make restitution. Put your ears down to my mouth. The treasure is hidden in. At this instant, a horrible change came over his expression. His eyes stared wildly, his jaw dropped, and he yelled in a voice which I'd never forget.
Keep him out! For Christ's sake, keep him out!
We both stared round at the window behind us and saw where his gaze was fixed. The face was looking in at us from the darkness, but we could see the whitening of the nose pressed against the glass. It was a bearded, hairy face, with wild, cruel eyes and an expression of consented malevolence. My brother and I rushed forward to the window, but the man was gone, and when we turned to my father, his head had dropped and his pulse had ceased to beat. We returned to the garden that night, but found no sign of the intruder. Just under the window, a single footmark was visible in the flower bed. But for that one trace, we might have thought that our imaginations had conjured up a wild, fierce face. Very soon, however, had another and more striking proof that there were secret agencies at work all around us. The window of my father's room was found open in the morning, and his cupboards and boxes had been rifled, and upon his chest was fixed a torn piece of paper, with the words, the sign of 4, scrawled across it. What that phrase meant, and who our secret visitor may have been, we never knew. As far as we can judge, none of my father's property had been actually stolen, though everything had been turned out. My brother and I naturally associated this particular incident with the fear which haunted my father during his life, but it was still a complete mystery to us. The little man stopped to relight his hookah and puffed thoughtfully for a moment. We had all sat absorbed listening to the extraordinary narrative. At the short account of her father's death, Miss Morstan had turned deadly white, and for a moment I feared that she was about to faint. She rallied, however, on drinking a glass of water which I had poured out of one of the Venetian crafts near the side table. Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his chair, an abstracted expression, and his lids drawn together in glittering eyes. As I glanced at him, I could not but think how that very day he had complained bitterly about the commonplaces of life. Here at least was a problem which would tax his sagacity to the utmost. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto looked from one to the other of us in obvious pride at the effect which the story had produced, and then continued between the puffs of his overgrown pipe. My brother and I, he said, were, as you can imagine, much excited for the treasure that my father had spoken of. For weeks and for months we dug and delved into every part of the garden without discovering its whereabouts. It was maddening to think that the hiding place was on his very lips in the moment he died. We could judge the splendor of the missing riches in the chaplet which we had taken out. Over the chaplet my brother Bartholomew and I had given little discussion. The pearls were evidently of great value, but he was averse to part with them, for between friends my brother was himself a little too inclined to my father's fault. He thought, too, that if we parted with the chaplets, it might give rise to gossip, and finally bring us to trouble. It was all I could do to persuade him was to let me find out Miss Morstan's address and send her the detached pearl at fixed intervals, so at least she might have and never feel displeasure. It was kindly enough, said our companion earnestly. It was extremely good of you. The little man waved his hand deprecatingly. "We were your trustees," he said. "That was the view in which I took it, though Brother Bartholomew could not altogether see it in that light. We had plenty of money ourselves, and I desired no more. Besides, it would have been such bad taste to have treated a young lady in such scurvy a fashion. La mauvaise grâce menia al crime. The French have a very neat way of putting things. Our difference of opinion on this subject went so far as I thought it was best to the rooms myself. So I left Pondicherry Lodge, taking the old Kurtmajer and Williams with me. Yesterday, however, I learnt that an event of extreme importance had occurred. The treasure has been discovered. I instantly communicated with Miss Morstan, and it only remains for us to drive out to Norwood to demand our share. I explained my views last night to Brother Bartholomew, and so, to be expected, it was not welcome visitors."
Mr. Thaddeus Sholto ceased, and sat twitching on his luxurious settee.
We all remained silent in our thoughts upon the new developments which the mystery business had taken. Holmes was the first to spring to his feet. "You have done well, sir, from first to last," he said. "It is possible that we may be able to make some small return by throwing some light upon that which is still dark to you. But Miss Morstan remarked just now it is late, and we had best put the matter through without delay." Our new acquaintance was deliberately coiled up with the tube of his hookah, and produced from behind a curtain a very long befrogged topcoat, with an astrakhan collar and cuffs. This he buttoned up tightly, and in spite of the extreme closeness of the night. He finished his attire by putting on a rabbit-skin cap with a hanging lappets which covered his ears, so that no part of him was visible save his mobile and peaky face. "My health is somewhat fragile," he remarked, as he led the way down the passage. "I am compelled to be a valetudinarian. Our cab was waiting outside, and our program was evidently prearranged, for the driver steered off at once at a rapid pace. Thaddeus Sholto talked incessantly in a voice which rose high above the rattle of the wheels. "Bartholomew was a clever fellow," he said. "How do you think he found out about the treasure was? He had come to the conclusion that it was somewhere indoors, so he worked out all the cubic space of the house and made measurements everywhere, so that not 1 inch would be unaccounted for. Among other things, he found that the height of the building is 74 feet, but on adding together the heights of all the separate rooms and making every allowance for the space between, which he ascertained were by borings, he could not bring the total to more than 70 feet. There were 4 feet unaccounted for. These could only be the top of the building. He knocked a hole, therefore, into the lath and plaster ceiling of the highest room, and there, sure enough, he came upon another little garret above it, which he had sealed up and was known to no one. In the center of the room the treasure chest, resting upon 2 rafters. He lowered it through the hole, and there it lies. That computes the value of the jewels at not less than 500,000 sterling." At the mention of this gigantic sum, we all stared at one another open-eyed. Miss Morstan could secure her rights. We could change from a needy governess to a rich heiress in England. Surely it was the place of a loyal friend to rejoice at such news. Yet I was ashamed to say that selfishness took me by my soul, and that my heart turned as heavy as lead within me. I stammered out a few halting words of congratulations, and then sat downcast, with my head drooped deaf to the babble of the new acquaintance. He was clearly a confirmed hypochondriac, and I was dreamily conscious of he was pouring forth interminable strains of symptoms and imploring information as to the composition and actions of innumerable quack nostrums, some of which he bore about in a leather case in his pocket. I trust that he may not remember any of the answers which I gave him that night. Holmes declares that he overheard me caution him against the great danger of taking more than 2 drops of castor oil, while I recommended certain of large dosages of a sedative. However, that may be. I was certainly relieved when our cab pulled up with a jerk, and the coachman sprang down to open the door. This Miss Morrison is Pondicherry Lodge, said Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, and he handed her out. Man, I cannot do that little guy's voice. Yes, Swinburne. I don't remember how long ago I programmed that. That's one of the fun things about Phosabot is you can you can set up keywords and then you can give it commands to issue from them. Oh. And thank you for donating to Wild West Wildlife. I'm sure they will appreciate it. Especially considering they've gone through a lot of babies so far this season. Let's see what's going on. Okay, that's 4 chapters of that one, so I'm trying to keep somewhat consistent on my readings. What time is it? It is only 10:30. Ugh. Let's see how long the next one is, just to be sure. This book is huge. It's a pain to handle. Pages are sticking together too. And the downside about old books. Chapters is this? Sort of the barrel. Doesn't have it listed as a part 1 and part 2. Let's see, that's 9 chapters I've seen so far. Chapters. Trying to find out what the last number of chapter this is. Oh god, there's parts in here in German. It's strange enough I was having to read some out in French. Okay, there's 12 chapters to the story. About right. Do 4 a week for it, so yeah, it'll work. before I start doing something else. But anyway, that's the first 4 chapters of Sign of 4. Let's see. Thank everyone for coming in. Let's see who I can read out to. We'll be doing fairy tales again tomorrow. Hopefully. Honestly, kind of surprised the thunderstorm hasn't started yet. That's a fun challenge. You're trying to figure out who to raid. Let's see. Do I see anyone else reading? Sophie is supposed to be reading tonight. I'm not seeing her on the list. Oop, dang, I forgot to catch the moon. Let's see, is she on? Nope, she is not on. Okay. Oh, dang. Let's see who else might be on. Oh, well, I think Dust just got started, so let's rate her. So, I do have raid messages. I have raid message for followers. Raid message for subs. And we will raid Dusk. Because we can. And thank you again for donating to the Wild West Wildlife. Said I'm sure they will appreciate it because I know they have been definitely having to handle a lot of wild babies getting turned in lately because of the weather, especially. But everyone else who's here, I hope you have a good evening, good night, or whichever time zone you may be occurring in. So, as long as you have a good one. And I will hopefully see you tomorrow for fairy tales. And I'm
Not at all plugging my book today. Though if you go to my throne list, and go to the storefront, it'll be there. So, yeah. So I will see everyone later, and let's go say hi to Dusk. Bye, all.